Today, we're going to talk about a really difficult moment in history, the mass exodus of the Kashmiri Pandits. We're going to look at the documented sources to unpack how a community with roots stretching back 5,000 years was forced to flee its ancestral home, all in the span of one single terrible winter in 1990. And that's really the core question, isn't it? How does something like this even happen? It's a story about fear, it's a story about displacement, and it's about how a society can completely unravel. And to get our heads around it, we have to go back a few years, because this definitely did not happen in a vacuum. Right. So, the Exodus of 1990 wasn't some spontaneous, out-of-the-blue event. Nope. It was really the final tragic chapter in a story of rising political instability and radicalization that completely changed the Kashmir Valley. So let's walk through this timeline, because it really sets the stage. You have this ancient community, the Kashmiri Pandits, who've been there for literally 5,000 years. Now fast forward to 1987. This is the flashpoint, a state election that was widely seen as totally rigged. And that one event, it created this deep sense of betrayal that pushed a lot of disenfranchised young people toward militancy. And that, in turn, created the perfect breeding ground for militant groups like the JKLF and Hizbul Mujahideen to pop up. And they brought a brand new and very radical vision for the valley.
And this was the ideology that lit the fuse. The goal was something called Nizam-e-Mustafa, which meant establishing a purely Islamic state. Now, what did that mean in the real world? It meant this political project automatically defined the indigenous Hindu Pandits, a community that had been there for thousands of years, as the other, as outsiders in their own homelands. All of a sudden, people who had been your neighbors for generations were being framed as your enemies. And this wasn't just talk. It didn't stay as an abstract idea for long. Before you can have a mass exodus, you have to create a climate of absolute terror. So the militants began a very systematic campaign. Their goal? To paralyze the Pandit community by taking out its most respected and vocal leaders. And look, this violence wasn't random at all. It was surgical. First, Tika Lal Taplu, a well-known lawyer and community leader, was shot down in broad daylight. The message was bone-chillingly clear. If a man this prominent isn't safe, then nobody is. Then they went after Justice Neelkanth Anju. This was a direct attack on the rule of law itself, sending the message that the justice system couldn't protect you either. By taking out leaders and judges, they were basically pulling out the threads that hold a community's social fabric together. And this just shows the level of psychological warfare going on. I mean, can you imagine picking up your local paper and seeing your name or your friend's name, your neighbor's name on a published hit list? These weren't quiet threats. They were public death sentences, turning your own home, your own street, into a place of extreme danger. So, all of this, the fear, the assassinations, the hit lists, it was all building and building towards one terrifying crescendo. The night of January 19th, 1990. This is the moment when all that simmering fear boiled over into a direct, unavoidable ultimatum for every single Pandit in the valley. On this one night, everything just collapsed. The state government had resigned, the local police and the administration, they effectively vanished into thin air. For the Pandits, this meant one thing, and one thing only. They were utterly, completely alone. There was no one to call, no one was coming to help. And into that vacuum of authority came the noise. An ultimatum blasted from mosque loudspeakers all across the valley. It was a stark, three-word choice. Rasliv, Galiv, Yechaliv. Convert to Islam, die, or leave. There was no fourth option. There was no room to negotiate for your life. And the threats got even more sickening and personal. Crowds were chanting slogans like this one, which translates to, "We want Pakistan without the Pandit men, but with their women." Think about that. This wasn't just political. This was a deep, gendered threat aimed right at the heart of the family, designed to terrorize people into fleeing to protect their wives and daughters. I mean, can you even begin to imagine the psychological horror of that night? This testimony from a survivor just captures it perfectly. It wasn't one mosque or one crowd. It was a coordinated, valley-wide sonic assault designed to break the will of an entire people. The very walls of their homes felt like they were screaming threats. So what happened next? Well, what followed that night wasn't a migration. It was a frantic, desperate flight for survival. An entire community forced to make an impossible choice in just a matter of hours. And the sheer scale of it is just staggering. Within just a few months, as many as 150,000 pundits fled, leaving behind absolutely everything: their homes, their jobs, their history. This wasn't a trickle, it was a flood.
And their ordeal was far from over. They escaped the cool mountain air of Kashmir, only to be thrown into squalid, horrible tent cities in the blistering heat of places like Jammu and Delhi. I mean, the conditions were deadly. People who came from comfortable homes were now dying from heat stroke and snake bites in these camps. And the psychological trauma was so profound that survivors often talk about a broken heart syndrome. And this slide just puts that loss into such sharp focus. On one side, you had the life that was stolen: ancestral homes, orchards, thousands of years of history tied to that specific land. And on the other side, the new reality: tent cities, complete economic ruin as they were forced into distressed sales of their property for almost nothing, and this deep, profound loss of identity. So here's the really crucial thing to understand. This wasn't just about forcing people out. It was a systematic effort to make sure they could never come back, and to try and erase their very presence from the history of the valley itself.
This table breaks down the strategies so clearly. You can see it was basically a war fought on four fronts at the same time. The physical front was the assassinations, to crush morale. The psychological front was the loudspeakers, to cause a total mental collapse. The economic front was burning property and forcing distress sales, to make sure there was nothing to return to. And finally, the religious front, desecrating temples to erase the community's entire historical footprint. It was a complete, horrifying system. And if you want to see the results of that system, well, this chart says it all. Look at that demographic collapse. From a community of around 150,000 people to just a few thousand. This single image shows you just how successful that campaign of displacement really was.
It was a methodical, step-by-step process. Step 1, you destroy their holy places. Over 200 temples were damaged in just a couple of years. Step 2, you take their land and homes, so there's no economic foundation left. Step 3, you remove their leaders. It's a textbook strategy for how to erase not just a people, but the very evidence they ever existed. And all of this brings us to this final haunting question. The displacement was physical, yes, but the damage echoes through generations. When a community is torn from its roots so completely, when its history is actively being erased, the fight isn't just for justice anymore. It's a fight for memory itself. What happens to a people's story when they can no longer tell it in the land where that story was born?